Hi, I'm Ernie,
And I'm Ben.
and this is Budget Nerds.
What was all in your mind?
You are not alone.
No, you are not. Welcome back to the show, friends. Excited for this episode. We're going to be talking about what do you do when you're in between budget priorities? Maybe you just achieved or reached a big financial goal. Now you're moving on to the next thing, and you don't know what that next thing is, or you do know what the next thing is, but you realize there's this change in energy from one focus to another. This episode is actually inspired by a comment. And Ben, I don't even know which episode this comment was on, but it's from Malin. And I'll just read it for you folks. I would love to see you guys do a video on how to manage your budget when you're in between priorities. Like if you've got your budget pretty much figured out, you're not struggling to make ends meet anymore, but now the budget feels a bit on autopilot and without direction. Perhaps you just accomplished a big financial goal and now you get to reprioritize, or perhaps life has thrown you a curveball or two and you no longer know what to make your priority. I guess the question is, how do you make budgeting fun and engaging when you don't really know what you're aiming for anymore? So I thought that was a great topic. We thought that was a great topic. So let's kick it off. Ben, can you relate to this? Have you been in a situation where you're like, don't really know what to make of the budget anymore? I'm kind of, lost sight or lost focus.
Yeah, I feel like there's kind of, there's peaks and valleys in budgeting. Sometimes it gets kind of boring. I mean, like talk about like first world problems, right? Like, oh man, I've achieved so many financial goals. It's getting too easy, or maybe it's like maybe not instead of a first world problem, it's like a veteran budgeter problem, right? But I mean, I think I've been there. In some ways, I'm there now, but also not. We can talk about that, but yeah. Because early on, I feel like when you first start budgeting, it's like really obvious. Like usually the reason why you start budgeting is because you have some kind of a trigger event in your life. For me, it was having a baby. We needed to save up a bunch of money to have a baby because it's expensive, right? And also just get my act together because I'm responsible for another human being here soon, right? Something like that. And so it's really obvious. And then when you kind of get your feet under you and when you achieve that goal, it's kind of like, oh, what's next? And often it's kind of anticlimactic. Like, did you ever feel when you paid off all your debt, did you feel kind of like, oh, that's it? did you ever feel like that?
Totally.
Yeah.
Right. I thought I was going to be like celebrating and partying for a week. Yeah. Totally anticlimactic.
I mean, like, I'm all about more cash flow, right? And even when we paid off the house, like we sat down to reallocate all that cash flow, and it kind of goes by pretty quick, And it's like, oh, okay, well, guess we're just gonna keep moving on, So I think that happens sometimes. It's a little anticlimactic when you reach a goal, like paying off debt or saving for something big, but it's still good. What about you, Ernie? What kind of season are you in now? Because I mean, you just got into the house, I guess, about a year ago, the new house and all that. Like, what are you working on? What are you kind of in a rut right now? Do you feel like, or where are you at?
I do feel like I'm in a little bit of a rut, kind of in between priorities, and so my trigger moment, what brought me to the budget, was debt. My wife and I were in the process of adopting. And so we had to take a hard look at our finances. And I was like, oh my goodness, we have a lot of debt. So two student loans, some medical debt. There was a car payment in there. We had a second mortgage, I believe. There was a personal loan, right? So I'm just like freaking out about all this debt, got on a budget, and just instantly became obsessed with getting rid of the debt. And that was like my passion. It was my hobby. It consumed me. And I loved it. Like I actually thought it was fun. And it fueled me through the whole debt pay down process. And so after we paid off all the debt but the mortgage, then I was kind of like, now what? Right. I mean, we started contributing more towards retirement. We started saving more for some certain items and expenses and priorities, but it didn't fire me up. Like I'm like,
Mm.
okay, I'm saving more for retirement, but why am I not excited
Yeah, because
about this?
retirement.
And then we ended up moving,
Uh-huh. Yeah, because retirement is kind of
and
like it's not quite as exciting. It's almost like a true expense. To me it's kind of in the same category as like saving for the car insurance bill that you have to pay once a year or something like that. But it's like a really long time horizon, you know? So it's not like a goal that you achieve at any point, at least until you retire, right?
yeah, that is a good point. It is kind of like the car insurance or the auto maintenance. I never really thought of it that way. I kind of always figured it was this big goal to save this massive amount of money, but it really is more of like an obligation. You know, if I
Yeah.
don't want to work my entire life, well, I need to start setting something aside now. But I don't know. I was never able to create a ton of energy around that particular goal. And that made me a little sad because
Mm.
I want to be fired up about this, because it kind of fuels me, it keeps me focused. Um, but then we moved to the house, and that was a big priority. And so then, I remember feeling energy around that. How can we free up some cash to do the things we want with this house, to make the move? But we're 2 years into that now. And so we're really kind of settled, at least financially, with this house, just kind of on autopilot now of, the regular maintenance that all homeowners encounter. So what's next for us? And boy, I don't really know. Maybe this episode will help me figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm actually in a similar place, at least a little bit. Because all right, let me go through my history of big goals since I started using YNAB, and this is kind of cool because like I can look back and see like what you've achieved. I Okay, so first of all, interspersed throughout all of this, I had 4 babies, and they all cost money to have babies. So I was saving money, pausing to save money for all those, right? But yeah, we took care of that. We saved a down payment for the house. We saved up 20%, which was like very daunting. I live in a pretty low cost of living area though, so not as daunting as some, but it was a lot of money. Um, and that took a long time. And then we got into the house, and for a long time we didn't pay any extra on the house. We had other goals. I think a few things that we fixed around the house, things like that. A lot of babies. Yeah, I think there was a long time there where we didn't have like one huge goal that we were saving up for until we got some raises. And it was actually funny because I think we were saving for probably Josie, my second youngest. Once she was born and all the bills were settled, I was like, oh, we actually have a good amount of cash flow. And that's when we decided to start paying off the house, right? And we did that for
Okay.
I think 3 or 4 years, and finished that up last year. And now it's kind of like we can do a lot of things. The overall theme of our goals now, and you'll know this from if you watch that Wish Farm episode, is home improvement, because we've been putting off a lot of things, like a whole lot of things that we want to do to improve the house. And so it really that's kind of the theme, but it's not like one thing. It's like a lot of little things. In fact, right now we actually have a category called next big goal. That's literally what it's called. And it's just
Yeah.
I put a bunch of money toward that every month. And then I move that money during a budget meeting. We'll move that money to whatever the next big goal happens to be, because it's so many different things, and we're kind of bouncing back and forth, because like we had one project that we want to do in the basement, and we saved up for that. I thought I was done with it. And then we got all our quotes, and there's problems with, it looks like we're going to have to replace the drywall, right? And so it's like way more expensive than we thought. So literally last night, my wife Katie and I were going through it, and we had to move money from another category that we've been saving up for a bathroom renovation toward the basic. So, anyways, I feel like there's lots of little goals, or there's lots of big goals that are we're kind
Sure.
of moving money around between them. But overall, I think it helps in my mind to think of it as one big goal of improve the house, just in general. But so yeah, we do have. I think do have
And
some drive in the budget, but it's a little bit less of a singular focus. You know what I mean?
okay, so having a lot of little goals, you've noticed a little less energy around that than the one massive big goal you had of paying off the house.
Yeah, it's a little bit less of a monolith. You know what I mean? Because before everything would be like I could before I could make every decision based on, okay, uh, do I want to increase my lifestyle, or do I want to pay off the house faster? Right. That was it. It's a very simple decision. Right.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like, do I want to increase my lifestyle a little bit, or do I want to improve the house in one of a dozen ways, right? And so there's so many different ways
Yeah, yeah.
that it could go. So it's a little bit less. It's a little bit. It's less neat, I think. But still, I don't think I'm in a place right now where I'm not feeling energy. I think there's a lot of energy toward that. So that's good.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering, well, maybe is that something that's common amongst all budget nerds, right? I mean, there's only probably a handful of really big financial goals,
Mm,
saving for a massive down payment, paying off debt, those are the two big ones that I can think of. And then
yeah.
everything else though, it's just a whole bunch of little goals. And
Yeah.
so, of course, it's going to be natural that maybe there's a little less energy around those smaller goals, but doesn't mean they're any less or more important than the big ones.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of interesting. I wonder if there'll ever be a point. I'm just in home improvement mode so much. I'm gonna buy a fridge. It's gonna happen soon. Um, we're thinking about going. We're trying to
We're
find a
gonna,
time when we can get a babysitter, so we can go to Home Depot and look at the refrigerators. Because like
yeah.
that's the most romantic date probably ever. Because like I feel like I need to actually see them. So anyway, yeah, we might do that. Actually, we
That'd
might
be a
do that
great
tonight.
meme. Any social person listing like dates in your 20s versus dates in your 30s and 40s.
Right. Oh, it's one of those things. Like I want to see the thing, and anyway, um, but it's hard to get out there. Especially together. I mean, I'm not bringing my. I'm making a big decision about buying a refrigerator. I'm not going to have 4 kids around. That's going to be terrible. So you're going to get a sitter
No,
to
you
go
can't. There's no
shopping.
way to focus.
Yeah, this is like such an old person thing to say, but it's life. But yeah, so lots of little
And
goals, or maybe lots of
the whole budget nerd community, we demand that you don't come home until you have that refrigerator.
maybe we should buy it. It's looking like we might be able to go tonight. See if the sitter comes through. There's a little bit, but yeah, I almost feel like we
Oh,
should
wow.
just we I think we might be able to go. I feel like we should probably just actually buy it like all in one sitting. We'll see. I don't know. But we have this money set aside. It's going to happen. That's part of the general
All
home
right.
improvement goal, I think.
Well, we've established, I hope, that this is normal, right? This is
Hmm.
something that all budgeters are going to encounter. There's seasons of budgeting. You have big priorities sometimes, you have small priorities, you have different levels of energy
Hmm.
around those. It doesn't have to be this, constant, certain level of intensity or focus, right? So I don't know, I mean, just giving folks permission to, live in the ebb and flow that they're in right now. But for those folks that are in between, let's give them some practical tips and tricks on things that they can do to maybe get re-engaged with the budget. How does that sound?
Sounds great. Let's do it. Yeah, the first one we have listed here is a clarity break for your finances. Figure out what you really really want right now. And what we mean by a clarity break, this is kind of a thing that's kind of in the culture among the YNAB staff, which we encourage people every so often, maybe like once a quarter, once a month, to have a clarity break, which means the rules of a clarity break are you go somewhere else. So like you go to a coffee shop, you go somewhere that's not your regular place where you work. You don't take a laptop or
Break out of the routine.
yeah, yeah. You don't take a laptop or a phone. You put your phone away, pen and paper, right? And just start writing down what your priorities are, what you want to do, what you want your next projects to be, and just write, just write. Just like and just do it on paper so you don't get distracted, and then kind of process what you've written down and try to draw some new priorities out of them. And I think that can be really powerful, not just for your job or or your career, but also for your finances.
Yeah, have you done a clarity break for work?
Yeah, in fact, I actually have one set up in my calendar for once a month. I don't always do it. I really should, but at YNAB we kind of have a culture of like you kind of make your job, especially on the marketing team. I think because if any of you work in marketing, it's like you can literally you could do anything. Like there's always more work to be done, right? And and so yeah, you kind of like decide what's important to you and talk to your manager about making that happen. So yeah, I've done that for work, and it's been really enlightening in a lot of ways, especially when you feel like things are getting a little cloudy, or you feel like you have like a lot of obligations and you're not really sure they're moving the needle. You know what I mean? Like, you ever feel like, "Oh, I'm just doing a bunch of routine stuff," and it's a bunch of stuff that is important, like, in the moment, but it's not, like, moving the needle, for, like, a big goal. You're not making any big moves, you know? And so, like, a clarity break can help you determine, "Okay, these things, maybe I should let go of that routine. Maybe I should find a way to streamline that. Maybe I should delegate something." And that way you can free yourself up for something bigger, something that's more impactful. Same thing for your finances. I think
Yeah.
you could look through and think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a few clarity breaks here at work and realizing, oh, I just got on autopilot, right? And I
Mhm.
kind of drifted away from what was truly important to my work, my responsibilities. And so same thing with the budget. We do get on those autopilots, life happens, we get pulled in all these other directions, just kind of drift a little bit. So taking that time to recenter, okay, here's what's really important, and especially if you're budgeting with a partner, right? That
Mhm.
can happen probably a lot easier. So get on the same page. All right, what really do we want our money to do for us? What are our priorities right now? This is something I definitely need to take my own advice on.
I think kind of the core of it is if you're not careful, like the priorities of your past self can kind of dictate your current priorities, right? Because your past self started all these initiatives, I mean, speaking from work, you started all these processes because you made this new, I don't know, maybe you worked on some kind of a new program or whatever, and then you have all this work to maintain it. And that was an old priority, but you might have new priorities, but you don't have space to actually implement those new priorities. And so you kind of need to look back, and this totally applies to the budget. Look back and say, okay, what am I doing just because I've always done it? And just because this thing was important to me a year ago or 6 months ago or even a month ago, right? And it's not so important to me now. And find ways to either completely drop that or do it differently so you can free up some time or some money to do something new. So I think that's really what a clarity break's all about.
Yeah, I think that, and this is why I like making a fresh start so
Mm,
often, either every January 1st or during a new season in life. I remember starting a new budget with the new house because, yeah, all of a sudden our life looks a little bit different. We value different things. And so the budget needs to reflect that as well.
yeah. I mean, I think that goes right into the next one we have here is do a budget burn down, right? Just start fresh and ask yourself, if I never had this budget that I've been using, if I didn't even if I'm just starting fresh from the very beginning, what categories would I add? What targets would I add? Just start completely from scratch and see what happens. It can be really exciting.
Yeah, and you don't even need to start a brand new budget if you don't want to do that. Just take all the money out of your categories. Then you got this fresh pile of money. I think it's a good way to just kind of look at, what do you really want your money to do for you? Because I can go through all my true expenses right now and just look at the amounts and be like, oh yeah, that's, what I have because that's what I've been saving. Like every month I've been
Mhm.
putting X amount of dollars into the category. So of course I have this much right now. But if I were to take it out and then you were to ask me, do you really need this amount for auto maintenance, this amount for home maintenance? I might give you a completely different number. So I've just
Right.
gotten used to what I have available, but maybe I don't need those amounts there.
It's almost like you need to take the it's hard to move money out of a category because you feel like you're giving something up. But if you just wipe it clean
It
and
is.
start fresh, then you can make different decisions. You know what I mean? Because it almost feels like you're doing something wrong if you're like, well, I really need $2,000 in my auto maintenance category. Like, how often am I going to have a car repair that's more than that, right? Um, and so, but if you take money out of there, I could feel like that. I feel anxious about doing that. You know what I mean? But for some reason, it's just a little
I do
mind
get
hack.
anxious, right? Like
Yeah,
what if we have a big what if we have a big car accident or something? Like,
yeah.
ah,
But if you take it out
but
completely and then make the decision, you might make a totally different decision, and you won't feel guilty about it or weird about it. Yeah, it's kind of nerve wracking to do. I don't think I've ever really done that. I mean, I did it when I did a fresh start, but I still had the numbers like written down, like the old budget in front of me, you know. So I kind of like
yeah,
refill it.
I know.
Like I'm a little scared to like actually because it's if you really want to be a purist about this, right, and like really do it right, like in the sense of I'm totally gonna just start over fresh. You wouldn't even look at what you used to have in that category, and that would be really
Yeah.
freeing. But it freaks me the heck out, right? It made
It
me so
freaks me out
nervous
too. Like I'm already starting to sweat here.
because I don't know why. I guess it's because it's been working,
Yeah.
and now you're like, and you're worried if you change it, you're gonna mess something up. It requires a little bit of courage, I think.
Yeah, but we're not spending it. We're not
Right.
spending that money, right? We're just kind of putting it into a different envelope, but I can't wrap my head around that, right? I can't wrap my head around having $500 less in auto maintenance and having it somewhere else in the budget.
You can
Like,
always change your mind too. It's just, yeah, I think when you budget for a
yeah,
while, once you get to a point where you really are using the budget to guide your spending on a consistent basis, when you actually put the money into a category, it feels like you spent it because now it's not available to you for something else, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's the point of budgeting. Like it should feel that way. Like you should feel a little pain if because that's scarcity, right? You're feeling that your money can only go so far and you need to feel that. But um yeah, I think sometimes we make assumptions about what we have just because we have it in there already. So if you completely burn it down and don't even look at the past balances, you might come up with something completely different. Could be fun.
This is totally an emotional response to the situation, but I'm thinking here, I don't do a fresh start this January like I've always done.
Oh,
Instead, I
okay.
just do the budget burn down because what my fresh starts have been, it's basically been a copy and paste of the previous
Right.
budget, except I delete some accounts and I delete some categories, but don't even look at those numbers. And then take a look at the pile of money and then walk through with Christy. What do we actually want and need in every single category? And just see where we land.
Yeah, I mean, you could
I
always go
really
back
want
to
to
the
do
old
that.
budget
So
if
hold me
you're
to it.
I mean, if I guess if you're real anxious, if
Exactly.
you could go back, but it might be good just to do the exercise, And maybe I should do the same thing because
Yeah.
even my fresh start, I feel like I went back to the budget and recreated it. Might be kind of cool to really start fresh. Hmm. There's a
I'm
lot
probably going to
there.
regret this in 3 or 4 months, but
There's a
I'm
lot
putting it
there.
out there. Hold me to
Well,
it,
you have to
people.
do it. You have to do it now. It's like me buying a refrigerator and you doing a budget burn down. Yeah. So if you're feeling that way, just see what happens. I feel like I actually feel like I did this before we started paying off the house because I was in a place where I wasn't sure what was next because we just got the. It's so funny when you have a big medical event like having a baby or something else. Like I think we got like a bill and then like a refund and then a bill and I'm like from the same hospital, and I'm like, can you guys just figure this out? Like it took like we had a baby in February and I think it took until like April for it all to wash out, right? And it all to kind of be clear.
Okay.
And then I think I realized I was like, oh, I don't really know what's next. And I was thinking, I was like, well, what if we paid off the house? And without telling Caitlin, I did this. I basically burned down the budget and I said, okay, well, what if we cut here and we made a lot of really big cuts. I was like, what if I cut this down? What if I cut this down? What if I cut this down? And trying to hit a number based on what would take like a reasonable amount of time to actually pay off the house, and just see if it was possible. Because until I actually did the math, I didn't know if we could do it in a reasonable amount of time, meaning like 5 years or something like that, right? Um,
Okay.
and then I think with great trepidation, I brought that burned down budget to Caitlin, to my wife, being like, "What do you think of this? Like, like, are you going to reject this out of hand?" And she was all for it. She's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so, and then I was like, "Well, hold on, I was just playing around here. You're like all for it. I didn't expect this, right?" And I think actually what we said, okay, let's try it for like 6 months, and if we hate our life, then we can go back. And we didn't hate our life. We liked paying off the house, so we went for that. So that's kind of how the story was for me.
Well, the next tip for keeping the budget fun and engaging, this is more for myself. And maybe this is only going to apply to me, but maybe you just need to find another hobby.
Become a more interesting person.
As I said, when I was paying down well, when I was paying down my debt, like I became obsessed with paying down my debt. And so I was reading tons of blog articles, podcasts, videos. Like I was just all the personal finance content that I could consume, I was. And then when I wasn't consuming the content, I was just thinking about it and thinking about that next paycheck or the next bonus and what I'm going to do with this extra amount. And how much can I reduce my debt this month and all that stuff. And like I said, I enjoyed that. It was really, really fun. And so once I reached that goal, then I'm like, all right, what do I do now? And realizing, okay, we're fine. We're continuing to have money for the necessities. We're preparing for those true expenses. Maybe I need to find something else to do with my time. And so I've been trying to just separate myself a little bit from the budget. Now, it doesn't mean I'm not in there every single day, right? Money matters. It's a priority, but I'm not obsessing about it as much because the budget is doing its job, right? It's helped me gain control of my money. Perfect. It's going to continue to do that. Let me use my time and energy for something else now, like taking care of my lawn.
Yeah. Yeah. Like my hobby right now is buying. We talked about this. Is buying poker chips, right? And also,
are you still buying those?
No, I haven't. Well, let me think. I don't think I've bought poker chips in a while, but I am thinking about a little bit more. But really, the hobby is playing poker and being very bad at playing poker and giving all my money to my friends. That's basically what the hobby is right now. So I'm definitely not going to be like,
Okay.
rolling into any casinos soon because I'm not good enough. I would lose a lot of money. But I'd rather just give my money to my friends and who are better at poker than me. So find an expensive hobby where you give your money to your friends in a fun game, and there you go.
Actually, now that we're thinking about it, talking about it here, I took up woodworking probably a year or two after paying off most of our debt. An expensive hobby.
Yeah,
so I had to buy some equipment. Now, I am not, I shouldn't even call myself a woodworker. I'm making shop furniture. I'm building shelves and workbenches and stuff like that. But I love doing that. So yeah, it's been a fun outlet.
Yeah, so find some kind of other outlet for you. I mean, it's especially if you have some extra money to do something like that. I mean, that can be really exciting. It enriches your life, and it's a good thing.
And I mean, we've alluded to this, but I don't know if we've said it explicitly. But the budget can be boring, right? There's nothing wrong with a boring budgeting life.
Oh, so I see what you're saying when you wrote this in here. You mean like instead of making budgeting your hobby, maybe find something else to be your hobby, right? Like fill that time that you spent focusing so much on the budget of something else. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because I feel like I was the same way. I feel like early on I was like consuming all the personal finance books and everything I could, and yeah, I was like, I need to chill out a little bit on this because it makes you I mean, it's a lot. It makes you a little maybe a little too focused on money. Sometimes I've thought about that, like budgeting. I'm like, is this making me too focused on money? Because I feel like the goal should be to not think about money anymore, you know, or to think about it less, even because you have your priorities dialed in and you know what you're doing, right?
Right.
So yeah, sometimes I felt like I think when I was in that same place when like personal finance was my main hobby, um, yeah, I could get a little bit too into it. I mean, now it's also my main job, so I guess it's easy for us to say, Ernie, because we get to get our personal finance finance fix and get paid to do it. So so there you go. So this next idea we have is to re-examine your current setup, and it's kind of similar to what we're talking about with having a budget burn down, where you, in that case, you're actually examining where you want to put your money. But this is more about the nuts and bolts of your budget, like what categories you have, or maybe even just the category structure. I think just getting in there and kind of feeling those categories and maybe moving some things around, maybe just wipe it clean and start off with new categories, maybe adding some fun emojis to your categories. I don't know. Just kind of get in there and change the mechanics of your budget a little bit, and you might start coming up with new ideas or at least new ways to organize things.
Yeah, I'm thinking on the account side as well, especially for
Mm,
those folks, budgeting with someone else. You have your life, then you have your partner, and maybe you started budgeting together, right? So you just both bring your accounts into this situation and you just did that for a while because it works. Well, maybe take a look at that account structure, all of the individual, all of the shared accounts. Is this still what we want? Is there a better workflow we could create with accounts? And just see what comes out of that.
yeah, there is a lot there to talk about when it comes to joint accounts and personal accounts. I mean, maybe you have like totally separate finances. You maybe want to combine a little bit, or maybe even separate it. I mean, yeah, you could rethink that, and that could give you some new ideas. I think it'd be a really good idea.
Yeah, this is making me think about probably I think this was the most recent fresh start, or maybe two fresh starts ago, where I just changed the category groups and I went to
Right.
more of the themed groups, right? So instead of immediate obligations, true expenses, I broke it down into home expenses, auto expenses, non monthlies, entertainment, stuff like that. And that just refocused uh, kind of how much I'm putting towards these major areas
Mm.
in my life. And so I remember that new budget actually reinvigorating my passion for budgeting.
This is yet another example of Ben being very slow to make any changes to my budget here because I remember back when we had that conversation, I was really intrigued by the themed groups idea, and I was like, "I'm gonna try that," and I never did. So maybe I should. Of course, I'm saying it now. I probably in 6 months from now, I'll be like, "Oh yeah, I remember when I said I was gonna try that again, and I never did." But yeah, I don't know why I'm so nervous about like changing the categories around. Like it's not that big a deal, but I guess it is a big deal, because it could. I guess it could reveal some things, because you're kind of almost showing what you value by pointing out, what areas of your life you're spending the most money on or budgeting the most money to. So, yeah, there's a lot there for sure.
Well, and it made me think of another time too, where going through that fresh start, I was going category by category, and I was pretty much just copy and pasting available amounts from the old budget to the new budget. But I got to the emergency fund and I was like,
Mhm.
wait a second, I haven't been using this money for a while. It's just been sitting here. And then I
Yeah.
started looking at the balances of the other true expenses, thinking, hey, I'm pretty comfortable here. Why don't we use this emergency fund for something else? And that's when I just kind of took it out of that category and then used it to complete the getting a month ahead process.
Yeah,
And
it's
that
almost.
was, I was like, oh my goodness, this is what I want that money to do. Like, this is way better for me than it just sitting in this static category that
Mhm.
was never getting used.
Yeah, and the beauty of it too is if you ever did need it, you could grab that money from next month and use it if you had some kind of catastrophic moment, you know? So yeah, you can. It's
Absolutely.
really it's ultimately the same thing. You just move the money to a different place in your budget, and it kind of changes the mechanics of how you budget. But you still have the money, so so you have both, really. Best of both worlds. Yeah, I feel like the overall theme of what we're talking about here is really just give your give your budget a rethink, right? And open up some opportunities to change things. And that might kind of trick your mind into coming up with something new. And or you might go through all this and you're like, "Hey, actually I have basically the same budget." And that might be confirmation that what you're doing is working and it's still aligned with your priorities, and that's awesome.
Yeah, that's a powerful thing too, just all right, this is working, let's just keep staying the course.
Yeah. Another thought is to kind of take a look, maybe look at your recent moves or something like that, your recent money moves, see where you're moving money around in your budget. If you see like, hey, I'm consistently moving money out of this category to go to dining out or something like that, that might be a sign that actually maybe you do value that, value something different than your budget really says, And if you find yourself whamming money out of different categories all the time, it might even be a sign that your bigger goals aren't big enough. Like if because if you're like, oh well, I can just move money around like crazy and there's no consequences, it might be like, well, maybe I need to actually come up with a larger goal, and that way I might stick to my budget a little more, or at least my originally planned budget a little more, because I have this big thing I'm working to achieve. So yeah, look at your overspending, where you're overspending consistently, and look where you're moving money consistently, and that might tell you something.
Yeah, I don't even need to look at where we've been moving money from. I know it because it
You
feels
know?
like every day I've been moving money from categories. And I mean, we're in a time period right now where, things are getting more expensive, right? Higher
Mhm.
gas prices, more expensive groceries, and our income hasn't changed, but I'm finding that month after month we have less money to go towards, some of those other priorities, right? Because I need more money for groceries, more money for gas. And
Totally.
it really started bothering me this month because it's been happening a ton. And there's been some other categories too, like school. We homeschool two of our three boys.
Mhm.
And so Christy's been buying a lot of materials to get ready for those classes.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, oh, geez, I haven't been preparing enough leading up to this moment. So we're rolling with the punches quite a bit. And then signing the boys up for school activities is costing money. And I'm short in that category too. So I'm like, oh my goodness, there's multiple categories where we've overspent numerous times already this month here in August. What's going on? And so I'm like, okay, higher prices for everything. But then I also remembered Christy took a reduction in hours a year ago.
Hmm.
And, she went from 40 to 30. And at the time, we didn't feel that, but it has started to trickle down. And so
Yeah.
now we're finally starting to feel that. And I'm like, oh, because we didn't make any changes to the
Right.
plan when that happened. It was just business as usual. Now I'm like, okay, it's caught up with us. So that's bad budgeting on my part. And with these higher prices, I think I need to re-examine our targets, right? The
Okay.
amount of money that we want to put towards each category every single month, because I think that plan it doesn't always have to line up with our income. I'm okay with it being a little off, but I think it's too far out of reach at this point. So
Yeah.
I think there are some things that I need to dial back. And I just need to
Yeah.
get serious about actually sitting down, going category by category and looking at those target amounts.
And that's not always the most fun budgeting experience possible. It's a lot more fun when you get like a raise and you're like, "Oh, I can put money to other things." But it can still be really
Yeah.
satisfying. Like I think if you think of it in terms of, okay, like let's say for example you created a back to school category as a true expense, and like so you saved up all year for August when you need to pay for all these activities and all these materials for homeschooling, right? Uh it's kind of a bummer because it means you have to cut back elsewhere, but it's like, I'm doing my future self such a favor, right? And if you think of it that way, it can be really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, so rethink those categories, maybe burn the budget completely down, retry that, have a clarity break, think about what future goals you might have. Um, do that first actually, and then do the the budget burn down and see what you can have. Because I think it can be really powerful just to take a moment, think about what you want, think about what you really want, and then make the budget make that happen. And hey, that's what budgeting is all about, right?
Absolutely. And I'm sure we missed some things, right? What is something that you've done to help kind of reinvigorate that budgeting passion or that focus? So sound off in the comments. If you're listening to the podcast, you can reach out at budgetnerds@youneedabudget.com.
Awesome. Should we do some YNAB wins?
Let's do it.
Who's all your mind?
All right, our first YNAB win comes from Rebecca, and they wrote in the Debt Snowball versus Debt Avalanche episode this. They said, I'll be out of debt next month completely. Woo! Yeah, that's awesome. Paying off $40,000 credit cards and student loans in 3 years. Amazing. Didn't get serious about it until 1.5 years ago. So it sounds like they did the bulk of that just 1.5 years. I did the debt snowball method because I needed the small wins over time. Didn't think I was going to ever get my student loans paid off, but let me tell you, you can do it and it's completely worth it. Yes, yes, you can, guys. Follow Rebecca's footsteps. That's so awesome, Rebecca. Good job. And thanks for the kind words and encouragement.
Congratulations. And Rebecca, we need to know what's next, right?
Yeah,
So
there you go.
you are now in between priorities, I'm guessing. Hit this huge milestone. What's next for you? What's bringing you energy around the budget? We'd love to hear. All right, my YNAB win comes from Lindsay. This is from the episode where we talked about working with a bunch of budget nerds. Here's my YNAB win. Today, I got my last teacher paycheck of the 21-22 school year. My salary is split into 24 pays instead of 20, so I got my regular pay plus a check worth 4 pays to cover the summer months. However, with YNAB, I'm a month ahead, so even though it's the last day of June, I'm fully funded through September. When I start getting paid in September, I will be budgeting for October. Goodbye, money anxiety. It feels amazing. Congrats, Lindsay. That is awesome. Getting those paychecks in advance, putting them in the future, right? Letting the budget protect those dollars, knowing, hey, these dollars are spoken for. I'm set until I go back to school. That's got to feel good.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's one thing YNAB can really help teachers a lot because some teachers don't even get paid at all over the summer. They only get paid for like 10 months, right? And then the 2 months of no income can really sneak up on them. But budget, you can save that for that all year. Lindsay did get paid over the summer, but all at once, which can also be hard for people, right? So she was able to use the budget to make it simple, make it easy, make it not stressful, and that's really awesome.
That's awesome. Well, folks, we are running low on YNAB wins. So we need to hear from you. What is a budget goal you reached? What is even a small win? Whatever the case, where has the budget helped you lately? Where have you seen a little bit of momentum or a gain? Let us know, and we would love to share it on the show.
Yeah. And you can leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast, you can email us at budgetnerds@youneedabudget.com. Cue the jingle.
Bum, bum, bum. Budget nerds.
Love that jingle. So great. There you go.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for hanging with us for another episode. We'll see you in 2 more weeks. Happy budgeting.
Right. See you guys.